our first shot at watercoloring, which I hope to be a whole series on, starting with beginner skill sets, paintings that will look pretty decent and will achieve the result of introducing you to all the techniques you need to know about watercolor. The first thing we're going to do today is work on an apple. It's a simple object to do, but you're going to learn a lot of things with it. In this one, I'm going to walk through a number of items. I'm going to talk through composition, a value sketch, image transfer, using masking, mixing color, blending. Okay, so for composition, this one's pretty simple. And we'll talk in greater detail as we progress on different types of compositions. This is the 1/3, 2/3 rule. You don't center anything. I'm not a big follower of rules. I like to do what looks good to the eye. And in this particular image here, you can see I've offset it. Another thing I like to do is the folks that taught me how to paint, which I'll bring them up and introduce you to who they are. A style that I really like in still life is this Dutch Flemish style of a black background, which really makes images pop. The first person that had me working on this, I can't pronounce her last name, but it's Jacqueline, Gnott. And she was pretty fantastic about it. Was the first time I can remember doing still lifes, and all of a sudden she would put black around most things, and boy did those images just pop out. It's also a style of the Dutch Flemish school of lighting from the left, so your shadows fall to the right, which I've done in this, and you'll see in other ones as we go along. We'll be doing the same thing, but these are not hard and fast rules. They're just styles I like. So for this one, feel free as you advance to go ahead and do it on the whole sheet. I did not, because when I do an image or a work of art, the first thing I do is I do a value sketch. So in here, I'm using a pad, and I'll use something different shortly. I do in almost everything I do is just paper. Okay, I started out in pads. I've got a ton of them, so I used it for this, and then I created this template that I simply put down. It's not the squarest, but it allows me to quickly draw a box. And then what I'll do is I'll divide my picture up. I'll draw a box. I'll create my value sketch, and then I'll go and start working on the painting. So the first thing we'll do is create that template and create a value sketch. Hello, I'm Chris Fogarty, and I'd like to introduce you to a beginner series of watercolor paintings, and we'll go into more advanced stuff as this series hopefully continues. The purpose of this first one is to introduce a pretty simple still life form and to obtain a foundation of watercolor painting using this rudimentary still life composition of an apple. While the image consists of one object, it contains several key components that are critical skills to watercolor painting. Some of these skills apply to watercolor. Many can be applied to other mediums such as drawing and oil painting, and we'll cover these elements. What we're going to cover in here is composition, a value sketch, image transfer, how to transfer your image from the photograph to your painting service, masking, mixing color, and blending. For the purpose of the composition, what we're going to do is paint this apple. And, as I said, for the purpose of composition, what we're going to do here is, there's a rule of thirds, or in my opinion, off-centering the object. You never center the object. And when I say never, you can do what you want to do, but it's just visually more attractive to do and follow some compositional rules. If this apple were dead center, it's one, not going to allow for the full length of the shadow. It's also, going to force your eye right to that object. It will not wander around. I also want to introduce you to the style of which I paint still lifes. I paint still lifes in a style that goes back to the Dutch Flemish school, where I light from the left. Okay, so you can see like the highlight here on the apple. I have a black background, and so what we do is we get a nice 3D texture or object, if you will, because the light rounds out, and you know, we get more detail on the left side and obviously a lot less as it almost fades completely into the black background over here. So without any other delays, I want to go to what we're going to do. So normally we would lay this whole thing out like we're going to do and paint it, but I created a template a while ago just for me to create these things. So the first thing I'm going to do is divide this image up, okay, into a side over here, and I'll just take the straight edge and come down here, okay, and that's probably roughly right. And then usually what I'll do is, you know, one of these days I'll make a better one of these where it's perfectly square, but I got tired of just kind of trying to draw things with a ruler. But there, I've got my box, if you will. And the purpose of this is to do a couple things. One is just some basic drawing skills, but to get better understanding of the values that are going to be in this. And these don't have to be visually accurate. So, you know, I'm roughly a little more than 1/3 up on my base. So I'm just kind of going to draw that line lightly across, right? And then what I'm going to do is draw my apple. So my apple starts roughly about 2/3 down here, comes out to the edge probably here, and probably about here. So I'm going to just give myself a rough apple shape. I'm not trying to be, you know, realistically accurate to this. I'm just trying to get proportions kind of right, and then shading is the more important side. And I also use these sketches. I'll create several of them. I have a book over here that I tend to carry around with me when I'm thinking about stuff. And I'll sketch out, do my value sketch in here, but I'll also do my compositional sketches. Because, you know, I do two things. I cheat a little bit. I'll set up for photography, and I'll move stuff around till it suits my eye. But also there's plenty of times when I'll just sit down and I'll get this and I'll sketch objects, and I'll sketch objects in like kind of the layout that I want. So there's my apple. So we know we're dark over here, right? And we come in here. Okay, we got the stem coming out here roughly. Okay, now I'm going to put my black background in because that's my darkest element, right? Don't worry about that. I use erasers to lift to get my highlights back if I want them. We'll also talk about the paper I use. So when I first got into this, I was using blocks, and I have a bad habit of just buying lots of stuff. So I have tons of these blocks, and I never use blocks anymore. I use paper. I use 300-gram paper or 300-pound paper. It's the heaviest weight paper. I don't really have to tape it down. I tape it down just to hold it because I'll pick this board up and spin it around. Let's get this as black as we can, right up to the edge of the apple. Okay. Now, we got a highlight here, and then this is like a light gray. And don't worry, I know I'm using a heavier pencil. So I'm just going to smooth this out, kind of give me the tone I want. lift this and make it lighter because it's obviously not that dark. I think that kind of gives me what I want. And then this is a, I don't know how you pronounce these, tortillion or whatever, but they're used to smooth out your graphite, charcoal, whatever. Okay, right? So now it's darker in here. It's darker all along the edge because that's, you almost cannot tell the difference there. Right? This is all pretty light here. And then we'll come in here with the eraser. We'll pick up our highlight. All right. Don't worry about the stem just yet. I'm almost getting too detailed for my own good here. The idea was just kind of get an idea of what the value was. We got our shadow in here. And to get the color I want in here, we'll just do that. Okay, that kind of gives me what I want. Okay, so you can see I've got an idea. I'm going to be completely dark over here. I've already picked up a skill, if you will, with respect to something we're going to do in watercolor, and that is, getting this 3D look by shading, layering, and darkening the one side, so we go light to dark. And there's a term for this. I think it's Fusmato or something like that by Da Vinci. And that was the idea of how you created this 3D feel, this look of dimensionality with shading. Okay, so, and the other thing too is what as I mentioned earlier is, before I even got to this stage, I might just create these boxes in my sketchbook. Template's kind of helpful, and just kind of laid out my thing. Like, let's say I was doing just an apple. I know that my background's going to be somewhere like this, right? And I could play with different things. I'll do the apple there. Obviously it doesn't look so great there. It's dead center. Maybe I'll do something interesting and do an apple over here, right? And then, so it's cut off. And then maybe do, another apple over here where I got the full apple. Okay. And we'll get rid of this guy here. Right. Okay. And so when I'm doing like my layouts to get ready for photography, I know this is all black, so I don't have to bother, but I'm just playing around with shapes, where I want it. And so that might be interesting, right? I've still got it off-centered, but I've got an object that disappears off the edge. And I'll do several of these, and I'll play around with them. And sometimes I do skip this stage, and I'll just get my camera and I'll move around and stuff. But I, as of late, found this much better because I can sit there and I'll take all the pictures with my camera. I'll have it tied to my laptop so I can see it in real time. But I just found this works a lot easier because visually I can say, I really like this. Okay, let's go on to this next stage. So what we're going to do next is we're gonna lay down our image on our paper, and because this thing won't well, actually this one will fit. The one that I showed earlier, it did not because I was using a block. Okay, so this is what we're going to end up with. Okay, and so I didn't obviously follow it all the way out. And I mean, this is a finished product, but it's not obviously a finished product because it's missing a couple components. Obviously, I could cut this and frame it, but then my apple's centered, right? Which is not what I really want to do. So I would paint the thing out to the extreme. So let me just set this over here. So originally, I was going to propose using Cerl paper. I found that doesn't work. And to be honest, I don't even use transfer paper anymore, but for the sake of these first arguments, we will. Because it's simple. it's going to make this a lot less complicated. So what I'm using is this, okay, my Artscape carbon paper. So just for reference. And this is the Serral paper. But I do not like this. It does not transfer well. You know, it's got all these great reviews and stuff, but maybe someone's doing something different that I'm not. So let me just cut this up and make it more manageable. Okay, so I cut a smaller piece of carbon so it'll fit, or graphite paper. I'm just going to hold that down. You might want to tape it to keep it more secure so it doesn't bump around or move around. And I'm just going to get the basic shapes. Now the reason we do this is you could draw if you wanted to directly onto the paper. The problem is you better be perfect, because you start erasing and touching your paper and mucking up, you'll mess up the sizing that you need in there for the watercolor medium. And yes, I shouldn't be touching my paper as much as I am, but for this is an exercise, if you will, so I'm not as concerned. You know, because you don't want to get your own natural body oils on the paper, because it will show up. Doesn't always. Okay, and the point of this is also to get as much data down. So we know this is going to be the light yellow area, right? Okay, we want to get our stem. Okay, we want to get our highlight. And look, if the carbon transfer is too dark, you can always use your kneaded eraser. Okay, now I want to get kind of the rough, so I'm not going to push down so hard, but this is like the darkest area. Well, and over here. Okay, so I'm going to do this. Okay, because this is another dark area. So I've got a dark area, dark area. This is also a dark area, but it's not nearly as dark. So then we got this. And the reason that you transfer well too is you get your proportions perfect, right? Or your perspective and your proportions. Okay, I'm going to do the table in here. I'm going to do the shadow. All right, got a knot over here. I may or may not choose that. Now this is a reflection, so we're going to ignore this. Okay, I mean you can put it if you want, but I'm not aiming to be that realistic. So, and I am a realist painter. I'm just not a hyper realist. For me, if you're in this, it's just my personal 2 cents. If you're a hyper realist, I don't see why you don't just be a photographer. I know a couple people I'm very, very impressed with their skills, but at the end, it's identical to what their composition was. There's no like interpretive layer, at least not that I can tell. Okay, see, this worked a lot better. I didn't show you the Serral. We can pick up where my fingers touch down, a little bit of this stuff, and we've got our image. Okay, so there's a lot of ways to approach this, and we go down the road. I'm going to do different masking techniques, but this is our first, and I wanted to keep it simple. So down the road, some of the masking techniques I use is to put, and I got this from a mentor of mine named Lauren McCracken, is we'll put down a tracing paper or shelving paper, which has later replaced the tracing paper. I still like the tracing paper. We'll lay it down over this, then we'll cut out our image, tape the edges, and we'll focus on that thing. It helps me a lot because in multi-object images, I can focus on one, get it perfect, and then you remask that off and you open the next object. I've been playing with different techniques and we'll experiment with them in here, but we're going to start with the simplest when it comes to doing the black background. I do the black background last, which has its own set of problems, but the reason I do it last is because if I did it first, in any way I got up to the edge here and it touched the black, it'll bleed the black in, which is really rough to fix or correct. So what I'm going to do is set up my masking. Okay, so what I'm using today for masking fluid is the Richardson's liquid mask. I normally use Daniel Smith, and Pebeo. I've been using these Pebeo pens a lot. The only problem I have with Pebeo is it seems if they're on the paper for a while, they leave a blue stain behind, and that's not good. That's not good at all. But these things are amazing when it comes to lines. Okay. I do like the Richardsons, and I use these Cheap Joe crap brushes to do the masking. And I still follow this up because I don't want to buy these all the time. I mean, they're cheap. I'll dip them in water, soap them up. You can't really see that, but I have a block of soap off to the side. So just soap them up. Clean them off. Okay. And one of the things that Richardson's does have is it has a mask remover for brushes. Okay. Now, in the finer detail work that I do not use these liquid masks like this because I have to do fine lines and stuff. So the Daniel Smith's works out really good because it's got that tube. The only reason I'm not using it right now is my tube had dried up, or my container of it. So, but I like the Richardson. So I'm going to paint this in here. This is really the only mask I'm going to use. Okay. Let me rinse that off. Okay. I always put caps back on because I'm kind of a little clumsy. I'll end up with this stuff up all over the place. Now, I do tend to paint at an angle for blending and whatnot. And for washes. But I also tend to lay my painting flat as well. Okay. That should be dry. I use these pucks. I've just started using these. I got them on, I believe, Cheap Joe's. They're called pad pucks. They have this grit on the bottom, these gripping, so they grip pretty good. The other thing too is when I do larger works, this whole bench angles up for me, but I'm doing something small. So let's go to our paint. Okay, let's continue. So I've elevated my board. I want to give you kind of an idea of my setup. You can obviously see from the top down my desk here. Okay, I keep my brushes on a pad there. My mouse is over here. I'll move it over here for now. I've got my water bucket here. It's broken into two parts. I just cleaned up my palette, which is over here. It's a little farther away than I'd like, but you know, I've got limited space. I do have it on one of these Lazy Susans so I can spin it around to the colors. And the next subject I want to talk on before we start laying some paint down is experiment. Experiment. So when I did the last one that we did, or that I did, in here, let me just grab it over here real quick. I did something slightly different. Okay, I use a cadmium yellow in here, okay, and I'm not as happy with it, okay. Cadmium's not transparent, and it worked out fine, but look, you only do something wrong if you're not happy with your painting at the end of the day, but you learn from it, what didn't make you happy. So I'm going to use more transparent yellows. And a little note about my setup here. All we're going to really use for today is, all you're going to need is a transparent yellow. So my transparent yellow in my palette is an azo yellow. I also paint, I jump around with paints, but you know, I went through that hole when I got started buying everything that everybody told me to buy. Don't do that. I'll tell you what not to buy, okay? I don't really like Winsor & Newton paints. I think their quality suffered. I have not looked at them in a couple of years. I love M-Gram. M-Gram is a really juicy, very pigment-rich. It's a honey-based binder. The only downside is it's difficult to travel with these because they can melt up on you in your palette. So, you know, I travel with those in the tubes when I travel, and then just use what I need to use. So when I take classes, they're very high quality paint. In studio, they're perfect because I'm not turning things where in the heat, if some of the pigments, you know, if some of the binder melts and they get soft, what I do like is I can activate them very easy. They get gooey real quick. The next paint that I really like is Daniel Smith, and you can't go wrong there. I can't say that I hard and fast rule I don't mix them because they're different binders, because that's not true. I have mixed at times. I'm using the two different paints. Haven't really noticed anything horrible. Maybe over time there would be something in the painting might not work right, but I haven't had a problem with it. But in here, this is all M gram. So for today, we're going to use Azo yellow or any transparent yellow you have. On the reds, I'm going to be using quinacridone red and permanent alizarin, and then a dioxazine purple. And then I do this. I made, and I'll give you a thing. I made two of these solid blacks. Okay, so what I've done is, gets back to the mixing and not mixing. I created a Daniel Smith black, and I created an M gram black because we're going to need black. Okay, and we'll get to this later. But this is Lauren McCracken's black, which he has a recipe for, which I'll share in the notes. But he also now sells, Daniel Smith has a thing called McCracken Black, which is his perfect mix of black, and it's a really good black. So I will put in the notes the recipe for making the black. And then for the desk, the browns, I keep this. I tend to put the cloth over it to keep the dust off because, you know, if I'm not painting every day. We're going to probably play around with some combination of burnt sienna, raw sienna, and burnt umber. Those are my browns, or earth tones or whatever. So, now let's do this. Here, get my brush wet, okay, and the other thing I'm going to do, I'm going to use a little bigger brush for this. Going to get the whole apple wet. And don't worry, we're going to paint our stem yellow as well because it has yellow in it. And you're going to I do a lot of glazing, which comes in really handy if you also get into oil painting to get that skill. I paint both oil and watercolor, and I tend to think watercolor is a lot harder, a lot less forgiving. Oil is an opaque medium, so you can paint over your mistakes. You can scrape them out. You know, there are people who tell you can't fix mistakes in watercolor. That's not true. You can. In fact, I fixed one in that last painting, which I'll point out real quick. You wouldn't notice it, but in here I messed up this section when I was painting it. So what I did was I went up and I used some Golden's Absorbent Ground, which is a white, like what you'd use to treat your watercolor base. I mean, you could use it for a watercolor base, but your canvas. So anyways, I used that and I got my white paper back and then I painted over it. So there's lots of things you can do to correct. I gotta get this here too. Okay. Now let's come in here with our with our Azo yellow. Sorry, wrong one. Okay. Now don't worry, that's kind of bright. I used cadmium before, but we'll wash it out. So, and then we'll let it dry. I need any more pigment. I'm just going to use what's out there. there's a little bit too much water down here. So I'll pick that up. And this lifts pretty well too. You see where it ran out. I'll use a little more pigment over here. Okay, now, a couple things about watercolor. You know, I'd said experiment, do it. Experiment, try different things. You're either gonna like it or you're not, but you're gonna learn from it. Second thing is learn to walk away from your painting. My first couple years of painting, I would overpaint all the time because I wasn't happy and I would mess with it. Second thing about watercolor painting, unlike oil, is you do have to tend to walk away. I don't use the air dryer thing. I don't believe in it. I haven't looked at any studies whether it ruins it, but for me, it can push my paint. I just don't like it. So I just will pause and walk away and come back. I'll do something else, and I'll come back to this. So we'll be back in just a couple minutes. Okay, what do we want to do next? Okay, we've got the mask down, preserving the white. We've got the yellow down. Let's go in and start adding some of the more transparent reds. So, you know, the rest of the apple. Okay. Okay. Quinn red. I need something. I paint with my reference painting always in hand, so. Okay, notice where I made the cut line there? That's actually this cut line here. So it's red up to that line. And there's a little bit of red in there that's really, really light. Okay. And you see I'm getting the yellow showing through, kind of like what I've got there. So we're gonna have some fun with this. When I'm doing this, so I try not to lift up my brush. It's just for me, because when I lift up my brush, I tend to never put it down when I'm doing a tracing on a line. I don't tend to put it down in the right spot. But what's really nice about this layer is we get the yellow showing through. And we're probably going to mask a little bit of that just to preserve it a little bit more. So let's come in here. Okay, I'm going to try not to lift up my brush. And I use the Escodas, the Klinsky. They hold a lot of water. They keep a nice point. Thankfully, I bought like a ton of them a few years ago. I mean, literally a ton of them. Because now I went the other day to buy some more, some larger brushes for washes. And they're like a 16 or an 18 size. It's like $400. Okay, now you see I got these lines here. I'm just going to dampen this up and kind of just smooth that out a little bit. But don't worry, it'll dry. Now, I'm going to lift this in here because I went into an area that I want to keep yellow. So, this is something else I learned from Lauren McCracken. It's got blotter paper. You can buy it on Amazon, and then I cut up into squares. And that helps me lift. You can do it with a paper towel. I mean, I do it a lot with a paper towel. And if that doesn't quite do it, you get a scrubber. So this is a scrubber. I use Rosemary's and Company, but any hard bristle brush. But she has these really cool scrubbers that you can come in and just kind of lift that up. And we'll probably let it dry too. It's not critical, this piece. I just want to keep it light. Okay. And there I am overworking it, so let's just stay away from that. Okay. We're going to let this layer dry. Let me just come in here. Get this guy up here. Okay. Okay, and we're going to let this dry. Okay, so see, we got this is what's really nice about glazing. We've got the undercolors coming up through. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to do some more masking. Okay, I didn't do this on the first one, but we're going to experiment. And the other thing to kind of keep in mind is, I'm going to go back to the reference picture in a minute, is I'll paint the same thing a couple of times, or I'll paint components. Like if I'm doing a complex still life, I will paint, I'll paint several of the smaller components in it, because I don't want to get into a big picture and learn something and not be able to complete it. So that's kind of an important thing for me. I'm going to go back to the reference thing here. Okay, what we're going to do is just, I'm going to speed this up, and we're blocking out a couple highlights on our brightest color. Okay, so that'll be the orange that shows through. Now we'll let it dry, come back. And we're going to drop in one of our nice deep reds. We're blending out, smoothing the edges, kind of building our definition. I love painting apples. But the goal here is we're going to do these singular objects for like 10 lessons to get the idea of how to do fruit, flowers, brass, glass, copper, all of the fundamental skills you're going to need. And then we'll do more complex compositions. But anyways, as you can see, we're building layers and we're glazing, okay? Which is just a beauty of watercolor. And yeah, you can do this in oil, and you do it in oil, but watercolor it's the way to do it. You're just building on layers. The beautiful thing is if you glaze and you do layers, you're less likely to make mistakes, because what you're doing is you can't always take back from watercolor. It's very difficult to lift, especially with staining colors. Now we're putting in a dioxazine purple that is not black, so don't be confused, to get those dark areas in. But what I was saying earlier is we're by doing layers. Think about it, if you went in heavy to begin with and you have to lift, you're in trouble. Here you're going to do a layer, let it dry, do a layer, let it dry, do a layer, let it dry, and build. And you just keep building. The other thing about watercolor, and I'll repeat this numerous times, is that what you paint is never what it is when it dries. So if you're getting frustrated, I can't say this enough, and we're going to repeat it.
is do not overwork your painting. If you're unhappy, you think you went too far with something, get up and walk away. Go have a cocktail, relax, chill. You come back several hours later when it's dry, you'll be like, wow, it looks different. This is great. Because watercolors tend to dry lighter on the whole. So if you thought it was extra dark or overworked, I just can't say it enough. My biggest mistakes in the first probably, and I still do it today, is in my first few years of painting was overworking. I'm just doing some detailing in here. But you can see it's really starting to come together. Okay, we're applying some masking fluid to preserve some highlights. And again, I mask in layers. So, I'll build up a layer and mask because you might want to preserve a color underneath it and then go over. And we're just working on the stem and the core. And my first video was like an hour and a half. So what I'm doing, I'm trying to do these speed ups with narration. Give me some feedback. Do you prefer a 2 hour video where you watch it and paint for 15 minutes, or would you like it sped up? I've gotten conflicting reports from beta testers, so I really would appreciate the feedback. Okay, now we're talking about mixing blacks, and I use a Lauren McCracken method. Okay, so we use Prussian blue, permanent alizarin, permanent alizarin crimson, whole bean mineral violet, or carbol violet, or dioxazine purple. Okay, I've mixed massive batches of this stuff, and then there's usually to just tweak that a little bit. Lauren puts in um, quinacridone gold, and so there's a little bit of quinacridone gold in there. Now I'm putting in the black. This is the background. We're kicking in the background here. Now I'm masking off the apple before I end up blackening it and destroying it. Okay, so and I've changed how I do backgrounds a little bit, but this is one way to do background. It's a very good way to do a background. It works. Lauren would probably step in and say that I'm putting on the paint way too thick, way too fast, and he's right. Um, he would have masked the apple first. It was kind of an afterthought for me. But again, we're not here looking at the complex projects. We're just trying to get some fundamental skills down. So, we've got the apple masked out so we don't accidentally hit it and hurt it. And, the idea here is to get a very even cover of black. And you do this technique that he calls scumbling. And what it is, you're going to take that brush and you're going to grind out when you're laying in this black, you'll see like pigment clumps. You want to grind all that out. You want to keep working that area over and over and over again. So this is one area to do blacks. It's my primary. I have like 2 other mechanisms I do. Another thing Lauren does that I've started to do is he'll put a color in first before he does the black. So like we're doing a red apple, he might have done an alizarin crimson background first and then laid the black over it. Because if you lay the black in a thin enough layer where it's still covering, you'll get kind of a transparent flow through. Now you can see the masking, I've got that edge around it. I will fix that. Okay. And we'll see that. Okay. I'm fixing the horizon line because it was a little bit off. So I'm masking that to get ready to do the table. I'm masking the bottom of the apple. Okay. And just as a heads up, when we do more complex works, we're going to work on an individual object, like an apple, and then we'll do a pear. And then, if let's say we've got a composition of like 5 things in it, we will mask everything out except one object, and we'll cut it out, and we'll go through that method, and then we'll come in and it does a couple things. One, it protects your whole white paper from dripping paint across. The second thing is it helps you focus on the one thing and not get overwhelmed. I tend to look at something, if I got like 10 big tasks to do, I can get out of focus and overwhelmed. So I'm just kind of looking at the brown that I want to put in for the table. So I put in a yellow first, okay? For me, that's a Hansa yellow on my palette. And then I'm using one of the earth tones, probably burnt umber or burnt sienna. Yeah, that's burnt sienna. So I'm dropping burnt sienna to get my table. And it's a dry brush technique where I'm putting some paint on and I'm just dragging it across. That gives me a texture. And I'm putting another layer in. Again, we're glazing here, so we're building up to what we want. I'm creating the shadow. And I am using black for this. I'm using the McCracken black. And we'll focus more on shadows. The point of this video was apples. So this is a quick shadow, but I have, just like doing the black background, I have several ways in which I do shadows. Usually glaze them and bring them up. Might add some color to them as well, so they're not all just a dark color. We're softening the edges. Now I'm using a piece of blotting paper to kind of just lift a little bit around it. And what I do is I buy these sheets of blotting, you know, like ink blotting paper, cut them up into squares because they work really good for lifting. Okay, we're lifting off our masking. Now we're touching up those edges like I talked about. I'm using the red of the apple. I'm not doing black because I don't want it to come into my apple. Because the red can go into the black and it's not going to muck anything up. Whereas the black could come into the apple and muck it up. Now look, it's coming together really nice. Now we're doing the stem, and I'm just using a darker tone in there. Probably a burnt umber. And again, I really would appreciate feedback. Alizarin we'll use. Okay. And I'm going to come in here and just clean this up. Don't worry, I'm going to soften that edge up. I just want to get it up to the black without bleeding the black in. So I'm trying to come in here without lifting my finger. Okay, now what I'm going to do is just soften this edge up so it blends in with the rest of the painting. Okay, now in here, we're going to use a little bit of this yellow, kind of in here. Pull the red over a little bit. Okay, now let me pull this down. And I'm going to do the same thing over here. I'm going to grab the
permanent alizarin. I'm going to touch it into here. Get rid of this white line. Right. How's that looking? Yeah, that's looking pretty good. Now, I'm going to grab my purple. I'm going to pull the purple into there because this is dark up in here. Let me just get out some of it off my brush over that area. I'm going to turn this way so I can better work on this. Grab that dioxazine. We're going to use that all the way up through here, and I'll probably throw a little bit of red over it to darken it up. And just blend that in. Okay. Now, I want to come back to the stem a little bit and darken that up, because in the picture it's darker. So I'm going to grab some of this burnt umber, maybe some raw umber. Let's see here. So it's got this darker area right in here. It's got that little light piece right there. I'll just kind of drag this down in here a little bit. Okay, now I just want to lift a tiny bit off the edge here. Okay, now I'm going to let it dry. I'm going to come back and clean this little blue halo up here. I'm going to put the black in. Actually, I can do the black now. So I'm going to turn this upside down. Hit this brush with the black. Now this one, because I didn't mask it or tape it out, we got to be a little careful, and we got to do the scumbling bit here, or we're going to have a black line that's going to stand out horribly. But I just want to get myself in there first. And I'm not going to use this brush because this one's pretty new. So I'll come in with this guy. Just want to be careful. Got to be really careful next to that apple. I think this will come out just fine. Okay, let's let it dry. We'll take this off. I'll fix my shadow, and we should be pretty near done. Okay, I'm back. I'm correcting this area down here by throwing some cadmium yellow over it, because that's a opaque yellow. It's not where I want to stick to, though, but it covers up that blue. Now, I want to come in here and grab my burnt umber and just kind of, oh, there's too much paint on that. Just kind of break that up a little bit. Okay, let me go to my bigger brush now. See how we got it back. Who says you can't correct stuff in watercolor? Okay. I want to lift the rest of this and see what we've got to do. So let me grab this guy. And we're going to have the same edges that we had that we'll have to clean up. clean these edges up. I'm going to grab my smaller brush for this. I'm going to turn this upside down. And we're going to use our permanent alizarin, right? We're going to come in along here. And don't worry, it's making it look very red right now, but I'm going to drop the purple in over it. And that will fade in. I just don't want to pull this black back. Not that it'll matter too much down here where it's already pretty dark. Okay, now I want to really water this up because I'm just going to use this to push the color that's already there out to the edge. If it's too light, I'll darken it up. Well, I think we're going to be fine. Look at that. That looks good. I'll just soften the edge up in here, what little edge there is. Okay, I'm still going to tweak this shadow, I think, a little bit. I don't like this quick bump in here, but that's not a big deal. Okay. Okay, leave that alone. Now, let's just come in here and lift our highlight out. Remember we masked that earlier. Okay, there we go. I think we're pretty good. Now usually what happens is I'll walk away, I'll come back in a day and I might spot a couple things I want to tweak, but I'm going to lift this. And we've got our finished apple, and I think it looks pretty good. How about you? Thanks for going through this first one with me. We'll have more to come. Not sure what we're going to do next, but it's in the works. Thanks.